listening to Uptown Radio. It's December 11th. I'm David Jha.
And I'm Trikuti Rai. Congress continues to meet about the Republican tax bill this week. One particular element concerns Americans with disabilities who could lose long-term health care coverage.
It will literally kill us. It can literally be a death sentence for people with disabilities if they can't get their medical care.
New York City has lost a number of clubs and music venues over the years, but that could change with the city's new nightlife mayor.
It's almost harder now to find something fun to do in New York, even though there is more going on than there ever has been.
A Columbia University building was a hotspot for the gay community in the 70s and 80s. 50 years later, the building could become a nationally recognized historic place.
He danced with a man for the first time to Ain't No Mountain High Enough.
Also, people infected with HIV at the height of the epidemic on their struggle with aging. Everyday women speak out on sexual harassment and more on Uptown Radio. But first, the news.
In New York, I'm Makana Air. The suspect in this morning's bombing at the Port Authority has been identified as 27-year-old Akayed Allah, a Bangladeshi immigrant and Brooklyn resident. He attached a pipe bomb to his body using Velcro and zip ties. Law enforcement officials say the attack was inspired by the Islamic State, but that Allah had no direct contact with them and was likely acting alone. Governor Cuomo held a press conference at the site this morning.
Let's be clear, as New Yorkers, our lives revolve around the subways. When we hear of an attack in the subway, it's incredibly unsettling. And let's be also clear, this was an attempted terrorist attack. Thank God the perpetrator did not achieve his ultimate goals.
Allah worked as a taxi driver and has lived in the U.S. for 7 years. The 42nd Street subway station is closed, but trains are still running. The Port Authority terminal is open, but only from 9th Avenue. Many buses are not running at this time. Authorities are saying that the 42nd Street station will be reopened for the evening commute. Beginning January 1st, the Pentagon will accept transgender recruits. Earlier today, a federal judge denied a request from the Trump administration to delay an order to begin accepting transgender service members. This morning, 4 women held a press conference to reiterate claims that they were sexually assaulted by President Trump. Rachel Crooks worked at Trump Tower in 2006. She says while at work as a receptionist there, President Trump kissed her. Jessica Leeds, who later worked for a charity in New York City, says Trump groped her and put his hand up her skirt on a flight in the 1970s. Mario Batali is the latest in a string of prominent men to be accused of sexual misconduct. Multiple women accused him of groping them over the years, amidst other allegations. In a written statement, Batali apologized for his actions and said, "Much of the behavior does, in fact, match up with ways I have behaved." Batali has announced that he would step down from his company and TV show for an indefinite period of time. It's 41 degrees and partly cloudy.
We're continuing to cover the bombing this morning at the 42nd Street Port Authority. The incident was captured on MTA security cameras, but the investigation is still ongoing. We sent reporter Kelsey Blazer to Midtown to talk to New Yorkers affected by the blast. My co-host David Jha spoke with Kelsey earlier.
Hey Kelsey, this is David. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. So, what happened this morning?
Authorities are reporting that a bomb went off in one of the train stations near 40th Street and 8th Avenue around 7:15 a.m.
Can you describe what the scene looks like on the ground there?
Yeah, so I'm at 8th Avenue and West 40th Street. And right now, 8th Avenue is completely closed down. Police have barricaded the streets, so no cars can get in or out unless they are emergency response vehicles. It's pretty surreal, to be honest. A street that should be filled with Manhattan traffic has a lot of foot traffic, people who are stranded by the Port Authority, curious onlookers who are trying to figure out what's going on.
How are people doing right now? What's the response you're getting from the people on the street?
I would say I'm getting mixed reactions. Some people are frustrated that their commute is taking longer than usual. Some people are a bit shaken up knowing that there was an attack this morning. But for the most part, I think people are ready to get on with their day, ready for the trains to open up.
Did you talk to anyone who might have heard the explosion or was close by?
Yeah, so I spoke to a man named Abnon. He is staying at a hotel nearby, and he said he heard the bomb go off from his hotel room this morning.
It was like not so loud because the hotel is not close by, but you can hear the bomb.
Have you talked to anyone else, maybe some everyday New Yorkers?
I did. I talked to a woman named Asia who was coming from Christopher Street in downtown Manhattan, who works in this area, and she was saying her 15-minute commute took her an hour and a half today.
Usually it's like 15 minutes. Today it took about an hour and a half, I'd like to say, because I had to miss about 2 trains because they were so packed.
All right, thank you, Kelsey.
You're welcome. See you soon.
For local authorities, handling incidents like the explosion this morning requires a strategic response. My co-host, Brikuti Rai, spoke to Kevin Govern, who teaches emergency management at John Jay College of Criminal Justice.
So let me just get started with the questions then. How do you evacuate so many people from a place that's as busy as Port Terminal?
That's a very important question. For the individual passenger, situational awareness is profoundly important. It is not a trite statement to say, if you see something, say something.
Do you think this policy, say something, see something, has been effective?
Many of these incidents never make the news, so we can only hope that a heightened awareness has actually reduced some of the risk that has taken place already.
So how do you think today's, what unfolded today and the way the officials responded is going to help in the response of future events like this?
The best preparation is when you are not actually in the midst of an incident. Today's incident was captured on closed-circuit television, so there is a great deal of information that will be deconstructed. It will certainly cause the various levels of security to evaluate whether or not there needs to be airport and airline style security for individuals that are traveling by MTA, or for that matter above ground potentially by bus.
Thank you so much for your time, Kevin.
It's a delight talking with you today.
Congressional lawmakers continue to meet about the Republican tax bill this week. A key concern is the end of the individual care mandate, which critics say will leave millions of Americans without health care coverage. That particularly worries people with disabilities who say could cut them off from essential long-term care. Sarah Wyman spoke with advocates hoping to change the bill.
It's holiday season at Macy's Herald Square. Sparkly snowflake decorations hang from the ceiling, Christmas music tinkles softly through the speakers, and kids run through the aisles, excited to meet Santa Claus. But as they near the bank of elevators, the sound of Christmas is drowned out by chanting.
Disabled lives matter! Disabled lives
About 40 people are marching and wheeling through Macy's to protest issues facing the disabled community. And for Tareya Mitchell, the new tax bill is at the top of that list.
You need to have a big scream. This is not acceptable, and we will fight this.
Mitchell is visually and medically disabled. Social Security and Medicare help her, but they don't cover everything. Last July, she says she was hospitalized, and it ended up costing her more than $5,000 out of pocket. That's after Medicare reimbursements.
So I can't afford that, and I only get maybe $15,000 a year. So that's a third of my income.
Mitchell says she's worried those costs will grow even higher if the Republican tax plan eliminates the health insurance mandate that was a key part of the Affordable Care Act. It mandates all Americans buy health insurance to keep costs low. But without the individual mandate, healthy people could opt out, and Mitchell says costs could go up for people who really need insurance.
It will literally kill us. Can literally be a death sentence for people with disabilities if they can't get their medical care.
Full access is a right!
Shoppers stop to watch and take pictures. Mitchell can't see the crowd gathering along the aisle ahead of her, but she knows they're finally listening.
Disabled lives matter!
A mile south of Macy's, in an office a block down from Union Square, Jess Powers' laptop is open on her desk.
A lot of things are at stake right now.
Powers is the communications director at the Center for the Independence of the Disabled New York, or Sydney. It's her job to get people with disabilities to protest the tax bill by any means necessary. This week, she's been blasting social media with phone numbers and Twitter handles for senators who voted for the bill. She's had her hands full.
So sometimes it's overwhelming, and sometimes you feel like, okay, we're having an impact.
Susan Dua is Sydney's executive director. Like most of their staff, she has a disability, traumatic brain injury, and depression, and she's vocal about how the tax bill would affect her. Last weekend, she was arrested during a protest in Washington, D.C.
And it was one of the more powerful experiences of my life. When you see the people whose lives will be devastated, putting their own bodies on the line, it has got to move people.
Dua says she's ready to do it again, and next time, she wants to see more people on the front lines with her, especially people with disabilities.
We are going to continue to fight until we win, and we can do it together.
As long as the tax bill remains on the table, disability rights activists will keep fighting. Sarah Wyman, Columbia Radio News.
Graduate students will also be affected by the tax plan. As part of the overhaul, the House has proposed to tax them in new ways. While the House and Senate work to consolidate their plans, students are worrying and protesting. Students of color are particularly concerned about their futures. Colin Marston reports.
Traditionally, graduate students teach for low wages and receive free tuition in exchange. They don't pay taxes on the value of that tuition. But under the House version of the tax bill, they'd have to start. Edgardo Sanabria Valentin is Associate Director for Research Initiatives in Science and Math at John Jay College of Criminal Justice.
The main problem with this bill, it would increase the amount of taxes the students have to pay. Traditional graduate students are going to make $20,000, $30,000 a year, but would end up paying taxes on $70,000, $80,000 a year. It's indescribable the fact they would think that this would improve or will help America.
Valentin is a member of SACNAS, the Society for the Advancement of Chicanos and Native Americans in Science. He says science needs more people of color, but the new tax plan would drive budding minority scientists away, and the numbers were on the rise.
Science in the U.S. is very white, very male. We went from less than 1% Hispanics, for example, to around 3 to 5% every year, although the total population of Latinos in the U.S. is 15%. I think this is going to dial it back.
He says doing an advanced degree is a way to improve your prospects.
It's a way to reach the American dream. So this bill is limiting the American dream.
Steve Munoz is a second-generation American, fourth-year PhD student in physics at Hunter College. He studies how energy is stored and works on advances in new types of electrolytes used in batteries. We met in his lab.
Over here is our EPR machine, our electron paramagnetic resonance machine. This is something that has been a workhorse in this lab for a long, long time.
He says the proposed new tax plan came up so fast, he and his fellow grad students are barely prepared for what might happen next.
I brought this up to them and mentioned some of the details to them, and the jaws just dropped because this represents a huge cut into our living wage. I was looking at some of the numbers. It looks like even with the doubled standard deduction that my taxes could go up by thousands of dollars. And that's simply not something I'm able to sustain.
Other graduate students have echoed his concerns.
Tax the rich, not the poor. You won't have TAs no more.
Juan Avilia, a PhD student in comparative literature at NYU, attended a recent rally in Union Square. He says if this House bill goes through, he'll take a huge hit.
Personally, it would move me from being on a less than 30,000 income bracket to more than 100,000 bracket. In my case, that would mean self-deportation, but because I would have to leave the United States, I would have to go to Costa Rica, yeah.
Where he's from. Steve Munoz has 1 year left in his program. He says it's frustrating that lawmakers don't realize how much innovation stems from graduate research.
There's papers and papers that come out every year with real impact. There's inventions made by graduate students.
If thousands of grad students have to give up that work,
you're going to see serious consequences down the line for the STEM field as a whole, our innovation, our technology.
The Association of American Universities, the American Association of State Colleges, and the American Council on Education have all come out against the proposal. President Trump wants to sign the tax bill into law by Christmas, and in the meantime calls Reagan to Capitol Hill and protesters march in the streets. Colin Marston, Columbia Radio News.
Recently, a wave of sexual harassment allegations has filled headlines nationwide. The New York Commission on Human Rights gathered in Long Island City last week to hear from everyday women about their Me Too moments. Kelsey Blazer reports.
High-powered men, from producers to senators, have been accused of unwanted touching, lewd comments, and straight-up assault, and they are now facing public scrutiny for their actions. But according to Washington, D.C. Democratic Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, we have only scratched the surface when it comes to addressing inappropriate behavior in the workplace.
The only reason we are discussing this issue is because women have come forward to do something that is very risky, to indicate that they were harassed.
Holmes Norton flew into New York City from Washington, D.C. Wednesday evening to speak at the New York City Commission for Human Rights public hearing about sexual harassment in the workplace. The goal of the hearing was to bring attention to victims of harassment who don't make headlines, everyday employees. The commission took testimony from the hearing and plans to write recommendations for employers on ways they can better address harassment in the workplace. Nearly 30 women, including carpenters, store clerks, and models, testified at Wednesday's hearing. Lauren Schweitzer was one of them.
I don't know all the legal jargon, but what I do know is my experience, and I do know how to tell the truth.
Schweitzer has been working in the modeling industry for 12 years. She describes herself as assertive and says she tries to be safe when going to castings. But she says that doesn't always stop bad behavior on set.
I was on set, it was a job. It started, he greeted me, looking me up and down and saying, "Wow, she wasn't wrong about you."
She says the photographer's behavior only got worse.
Every time he took a photo that he liked, he would moan in a sexual way.
Schweitzer says this behavior is so common in the modeling industry, most agents have shrugged off her complaints.
You know, everybody glamorizes modeling. In actuality, it is a hard job. And when people of power abuse that and they think that we're there for fun, it gets dangerous.
And the younger you are when it happens, the harder it can be to push back. Caridad Castro was a child working at a chain grocery store when her superior began harassing her.
He was 32. Yeah, I always remember that very specifically, that he was 32 and I was 13. And I remember...
As a young teenager, Castro didn't know how to say no.
It was dark, and he would kind of approach me and corner me and basically try to come on to me. And eventually, you know, I did let him kiss me because it was my first job. I didn't want to lose it, and so...
Unlike Castro, other women didn't fear losing their jobs if they said no. They just thought of harassment as, well, business as usual. Longtime journalist Lynn Povich says in the newsrooms of the 1970s, a man kissing you or putting his hand on your knee, that was normal.
Did you deal with it because you were afraid you'd get fired? No. You just dealt with it because it was baked into the sexualized culture of the time.
Many are calling the outpouring of harassment and assault allegations a watershed moment for women's rights. But Povich, author of The Good Girls Revolt, was part of a lawsuit that changed the landscape for working women 40 years ago. She was part of a group who sued Newsweek in the 70s for gender discrimination, and won. The Newsweek lawsuit prompted women at Time Inc., NBC, Sports Illustrated, and the AP to also sue their employers.
I mean, we were sort of astounded by the ripple effect because we hadn't actually thought beyond our own situation. You know, it's interesting. I mean, we did what we did because we wanted to make it better for women at Newsweek. We didn't actually anticipate what the effect of it would be, the impact.
Ultimately, their suit over fair pay and promotions made life better for a lot of women as well. Just as many women opening up today about harassment hope their stories will improve life for future generations. Kelsey Blazier, Columbia Radio News.
The number of new HIV diagnoses in New York City dropped last year by nearly 9% compared to the year before, according to a new report from the health department. But some New Yorkers contracted the virus many years ago. They've been living with HIV for most of their lives, and they're dealing with the stigmas of both growing old and being infected. Brikuti Rai has the story.
Eric Sawyer welcomes guests to the Arts and AIDS exhibition, which opened last month at the Leslie Lohman Museum of Gay and Lesbian Art in Soho. He works at the Gay Men's Health Crisis, one of the first AIDS organizations in the world. The exhibition is commemorating the organization's 35th anniversary, roughly the same number of years Eric has been living with HIV.
I actually became symptomatic in 1981 when HIV was referred to as the gay-related immune deficiency. So that predates the discovery of the HIV virus.
That was a time when little was known about the virus or how it spread. There was no treatment. Most people died within a year or two of getting infected. Sawyer survived, but he saw the devastation and loss at close quarters.
My boyfriend at the time came down with full-blown AIDS in 1984 and died in 86, and so that added to my fear.
Sawyer is 63 now. He's part of a growing population of Americans over 50 living with the virus. It's a group that makes up nearly half of people with HIV. They've survived the virus, but Stephen Karpiak says their battle gets tougher as they get older. He's a researcher at New York's Akria Center on HIV and Aging.
Some people get cancer, they have heart disease, or they have kidney disease. They have a few of these, but this population has many of them at once. So they are facing a huge burden of disease.
Sawyer began to face health problems years ago. He had his first hip replacement when he was 47. Since then, he has had the same hip replaced again and other hip as well.
I'm having to, deal with basically HIV geriatric issues, and it's just another challenge for my doctors and me to navigate to stay healthy.
Availability of better drugs has changed the once fatal infection to a chronic manageable condition. Sawyer is used to living with HIV, but other people are less blasé. He says dating is tough.
There's often comments from people who do not have HIV that they're clean and they want anybody who approaches them for a date to be clean too.
Attitudes like that remind him of the 80s and 90s when he says people with AIDS were treated horrendously.
People would spit on you on the street and call you a diseased faggot.
Sawyer channeled his anger towards activism, and many survivors who've lived with the virus have done the same. But not everyone can reveal the HIV positive status as he has. Joyce, a former drug addict, is one of them.
Okay, ladies, what you do?
She has survived the infection for over 20 years now and is a peer educator in New York. She works with people infected with or affected by HIV.
Through the peer training we do and the support that we offer, I really see people change their lives.
But she hasn't revealed her HIV positive status to her family.
I grew up in another part of the country where people are extremely conservative. It's, you have a lot of guilt and shame when you're HIV positive, even when you've been working on yourself.
Like most older adults living with HIV, Joyce is battling not just the stigma, but also her deteriorating health. She had a first knee replacement 5 months ago.
Every health concern that I, as a 69-year-old person, has is heightened because of my HIV status.
HIV is no longer a death sentence. But Stephen Karpiak says too many people still look on it as a moral stain. It's hard to find caregivers and hard to keep friends.
It won't happen until we help the person with HIV, especially older adults, stand up and say, look at me, I'm here.
Until then, overcoming stigma and improving the lives of long-term survivors of HIV will remain a challenge. Prikuti Rai, Columbia Radio News.
To celebrate the LGBT community, a Historic Sites project is retracing the steps of some of the city's gay influencers. The initiative is part geographic archive, part campaign to nominate sites to the National Register of Historic Places. The honorary federal list includes more than 90,000 sites, yet LGBT representation is largely missing. Their next nomination has roots at Columbia University. Heather Schraring reports.
American history is often taught to us through a particular lens, and a lot of voices get left out. Or the history is harder to find. That's the case with much of New York's queer history.
LGBT history is hidden history. It's hidden for so many reasons. We were criminalized, we were prosecuted, we were oppressed, we were repressed.
Jay Shackley is the co-founder of the NYC LGBT Historic Sites Project. He's made it his mantra to make an invisible history visible by mapping cultural sites important to New York's gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender community. Since the group officially started almost 2 years ago, they've mapped more than 100 locations in all 5 boroughs. They've even managed to achieve National Register of Historic Places status for 3 New York locations. Andrew Dolkert says the next nomination is Columbia University's Earl Hall, the birthplace of the school's LGBT-focused student group in the 1960s.
This was the site of the first collegiate gay group in America and probably in the world.
Dolkert recited the history of the student group to a crowded room full of mostly visitors to Columbia's campus late last month. He says in the 60s, talking about gay issues was still considered taboo, even in New York, a liberal leader in gay civil rights. Though it took a few months to get off the ground, the first known student homophile league formed on Columbia's campus in April 1967 50 years ago. They held meetings in Earl Hall with one promise: no gay dances. The administration received a slew of nasty responses from alumni and local newspapers, like the New York Times. But they got a few pats on the back, too. Perhaps most profound was gay activist Foster Gunnison Jr., a 1949 grad who wrote to the administration saying this:
I rather think the day will come when Columbia will be generally recognized as having done the right thing and have been the first to do it.
The group kept its promise of no gay dances for 3 years. But after the Stonewall riots in 1969, gay and lesbian activists grew more demanding. So in 1970, they began hosting dances in Earl Hall the first Friday of every month. And they were a hit.
It was a place where gay people could feel normal just having a great open experience among other gay people.
Some of the only gay gathering spaces were bars and nightclubs, and most were mafia-run then. In general, they could be scary for some. The dances were created as an alternative to drinking establishments, another space where people could let their hair down.
One person that I spoke to said he had never seen men dance together, and he danced with a man for the first time to Ain't No Mountain High Enough.
After a few years, the events at Earl Hall got more sophisticated. The dances not only became the center for gay culture at Columbia, it seemed like the entire city wanted to come.
The peak was they had 1,600 people once that actually security had to come and tell them that they had to thin out the crowd because it was too much.
The idea of space and who owns it has always been a contentious issue. That was no different for gay students at Columbia. But they not only found a home for themselves, they inspired other campuses across the city to do the same.
Earl Hall's auditorium was not a gay space, but gay people made it their space during the times they were having those dances.
If added, Earl Hall would join 4 other Columbia buildings already on the National Register. Heather Schraring, Columbia Radio News.
The bombing at the Port Authority this morning is a reminder that disaster is never far away, and when it strikes, even people who aren't religious want some spiritual comfort. That's why a group of pastors, monks, and rabbis spent 2 days learning about the life cycle of a crisis and the Federal Incident Command System. Madeline Thompson reports.
In a small, crowded room in Midtown, 30 chaplains are learning what to do in a worst-case scenario.
You want to connect people at all phases to their support system. Whether it's family.
The non-denominational group is gathered for 2 days of training. At the end, the chaplains will know how to stay out of the way of emergency responders, how to refer survivors to the right resources, and how to react when someone doesn't want their help. The recent shooting at a church in Texas and the season's major hurricanes weighed heavily on everyone's minds.
When disasters are kind of epic and national resources are spread over entire regions in the country, it's hard to get people to come. So all communities really need to be prepared to stand on their own.
That's Peter Gudaitis. He's the president of the New York Disaster Interfaith Network, which has been organizing these workshops for the past decade. Most of the training is about helping others, but it also instructs chaplains to take care of themselves.
Where there is pain and others look away, there will only be more pain.
While New York City has about 300 chaplains trained, Gudaitis says it needs 3 times that. Many religious leaders already play crucial roles in their communities, and it's hard for them to drop everything to help strangers. Still, Gudaitis wants to make sure a survivor's spiritual needs aren't ignored.
A holistic wraparound services approach has to address who you are as a spiritual person as much as it does as a physical being or an intellectual or emotional being.
This is also important to Ravi Vaidyanath. He's the executive director of the Ganesh Hindu Temple in Flushing and was in India in 2012 when a tsunami devastated the coast. He did what he could to help without any formal training, but then he thought,
why not we educate and acquire a proper knowledge and then do it professionally?
Thanks to his new certification, Vaidyanath will be ready the next time he's needed.
We have to be there. So we can't say this is not our job.
At 7 a.m. on Sunday, the Church of St. Borromeo in Harlem is about half full with worshipers. By 9 a.m., it's standing room only. Michelle Hodge is a deacon at the church and a newly certified disaster chaplain. Hodge already has some experience with tragedy. He worked for an airline on 9/11 and lost a friend on one of the hijacked flights.
So I kind of understand some of the things you might want to process immediately when something like that happens. But there's also natural disasters as well. Those are also events where you might need somebody to come and provide a little comfort.
Hodge grew up in the church and values it as a place where people can let their guard down. Yet these spaces are also vulnerable to violence. It's nearly impossible to prevent an attack like the one in Sutherland Springs, Texas, but now Hodge knows how to use his faith as a tool for recovery. Between hymns, he read a particularly relevant verse from the Gospel of Mark.
Jesus said to his disciples, "Be watchful, be alert. You do not know when the time will come."
Hodge and his peers are ready for that time, if it comes. Madeline Thompson, Columbia Radio News.
The New York City Fire Department is again facing accusations of racial discrimination. A class action lawsuit filed on December 1st claims when it comes to hiring and promoting certain workers, the department discriminates based on race. Jennifer Siegel reports.
Annette Richardson has worked for the fire department for 11 years. She's a director of human resources, a job she was promoted to 8 years ago. When she got it, she was thrilled.
I felt like that I could advance within the fire department just like any other person that walks in.
But that feeling didn't last long. Richardson is Black, and she says she's realized that no matter how long she stays in her position, she'll be making less, much less, like $20,000 a year less, than the white man who held the same position before her.
They can see I'm worth getting equal pay to what my predecessor was making, or at least close to it. You know, something should happen, but nothing did.
That's why Richardson is one of 7 FDNY employees suing the department. And it's not just the pay. Richardson says there are other barriers for African Americans trying to rise the ranks. They don't get promoted as much. She estimates she's applied for at least 6 different positions and only been interviewed for 2.
They don't bother to interview everyone that applies for it and then make a determination because they've already predetermined who they want.
The 59-page legal complaint also says that FDNY doesn't use common human resources practices, like giving employees regular performance reviews. Richardson said she's only gotten 2 or 3 in the last 11 years, and without one, a merit-based raise is off the table.
To me, it's like a slap in the face when you deprive people of moving up and making as much salary as the next person.
This isn't the first time the fire department has been accused of, or sued for, racial discrimination. Just 3 years ago, the city settled a $98 million class action lawsuit because of entrance exams that were found to be biased against Hispanics and African Americans. The number of Black firefighters has increased, and the department now has a chief diversity and inclusion officer. But those supporting the case, like Councilmember Jamani Williams, they say little has changed.
We're dealing with something that we thought we would deal with maybe in the 1960s. We are in the city that is called the most progressive city in the country.
The suit is seeking damages and remedies for the hundreds, potentially even thousands, of African Americans currently in or planning to join the civilian and EMS workforces. It also calls for an outside review of FDNY's job selection and compensation decisions. Lead counsel Cyrus Mary says there's a lot at stake for the city, and more specifically, for Mayor Bill de Blasio.
This case will define the civil rights legacy of this mayor in his second term, how he responds to this case.
Mary says this case is about holding the city accountable.
It is unusual to have 7 current employees ready to step up and speak truth to power.
The fire department responded to a request for comment with an emailed statement. It said, quote, "The department in recent years has demonstrated a commitment to improved diversity and inclusion unlike at any time in our history. The 7 named plaintiffs will continue in their current positions as litigation in the case moves forward." Jennifer Siegel, Columbia Radio News.
The Bedford Union Armory in Crown Heights is a 500,000 square foot site that has been vacant for years. In 2015, private developers won a city contract to overhaul it. Since then, some in the Crown Heights community have fiercely opposed the project, right up until the moment the city council gave it final approval. And their fight still isn't over. Amara Omokwe reports.
With the Bedford Union Armory's drastic transformation plan on the agenda, the most recent city council meeting wasn't your typical Dozens of protesters showed up. They've been upset for a while over plans calling for the Armory to be turned into a massive mixed-use development, complete with a rec center, office space, and about 400 apartments. To go through, the project required a months-long approval process, and the final step was a vote by the city council. But before that could happen, the protesters got so loud that they were kicked out of the council chamber's public gallery.
We're going to clear the room upstairs.
The chant "Lori Lies" refers to Lori Cumbo, the local councilwoman who's been at the center of the deal's negotiations. Cumbo started out supporting the project, but had to dial it back because of pressure from the community and her political opponents in the recent city council election. She ended up negotiating with the developers for concessions.
I fought with my colleagues to make sure that we ended luxury condominiums. There are no luxury condominiums or sale as part of the Bedford Union Armory. 60% of the housing is going to be for individuals making between $27,000 and $57,000 a year.
Still, community groups and many Crown Heights residents have continued to be opposed. They'd like to see the Armory turned over to a nonprofit developer or turned into a community land trust where residents would decide the site's future. But Cumbo said the deal needed to happen now.
Crown Heights and Brooklyn, New York is in crisis. We are in the largest affordable housing crisis that we've ever known. There are people that are languishing in our homeless shelters.
All of that was enough to convince the majority of her fellow council members that the deal should go through.
Adopted by a vote of 43 in the affirmative, 2 negative, and 1 abstention.
But opponents say they'll make one more effort to stop the project, this time with the help of attorneys from the Legal Aid Society, including Judith Goldener. A day before the city council's vote, Goldener helped announce legal action.
The basis of our lawsuit is that the city fails to look at displacement of rent-regulated tenants when it does its environmental impact statement.
In October, the city concluded an environmental review, a required step in the approval process. The review found that the Armory's redevelopment wouldn't result in any direct or indirect displacement of residents that live near it. But Goldener and some residents, including 53-year-old Lyris Ming, argue that's not true. Ming has lived in Crown Heights for decades, and her rent-regulated apartment is just a 2-minute walk from the Armory.
I've been here since I was 8 years old, and I can see a total change, and it's not for the good.
Ming says redevelopment projects like the one at the Armory put upward pressure on neighborhood rents. She says they encourage bad behavior from building owners who'd like to see rent-regulated tenants move out so that more lucrative tenants can move in.
The management, they're not fixing anything. They just want the tenants to leave.
According to a report released last year by the NYU Furman Center, the average rent in the part of Crown Heights where the Armory lies jumped by 30% between 1990 and 2014. That's one of the highest increases in the city. Esteban Garon with the Crown Heights Tenants Union says Councilwoman Cumbo is fully aware of these issues and pressed forward with the deal anyway.
And so Crown Heights Tenant Union is proud to stand with Legal Aid Society and with our other allies as we move forward and try to kill this deal in any possible way to the very last minute.
When asked about the lawsuit, Cumbo said she was determined to see the project through. Attorneys with the Legal Aid Society will try to stop her once their lawsuit is given a court date. That should come in the next few weeks. Amara Amokwe, Columbia Radio News.
New York City, the city that never sleeps, is about to get a nighttime mayor. The position is officially called Director of Nightlife. And, as Patricia Yekib reports, part of the goal is to bring more of the city's clubs and music venues back to life.
Mayor Bill de Blasio announced the new Director of Nightlife position in September.
The office will be led by someone who undoubtedly will be more popular than me and will wield tremendous power, the Nightlife Mayor.
The Mayor's Office of Media and Entertainment found that 20% of the city's music venues have closed in the last 15 years.
Oh my God, how many venues have we lost just since I moved to New York City? There's all the classic ones, CBGB's and Glasslands, but then the underground ones, Shea Stadium. It's almost harder now to find something fun to do in New York, even though there is more going on than there ever has been.
Brendan Sullivan is one of the candidates interviewing for the new nighttime mayor position.
No one was out there to protect them. No one was saying, you know what, you're a very important function of our New York City economy.
The city estimates that these nighttime businesses bring in about $21 billion annually. The nighttime and music economy supports 300,000 jobs across the 5 boroughs and the sale of 5 million tickets per year. The city says that the nighttime mayor will help streamline the process of opening a nightclub and finding ways to cut back on some of the costs. Brendan Sullivan understands What's hard about operating one of these clubs?
If your landlord's not raising the rent and you do have a comfortable space, maybe you're just getting so many business fines for things that you think might be more manageable. The health department, sanitation, things like that. It's just really, really hard to run a small business in New York City these days.
Other major cities like London, Paris, and Amsterdam already have nighttime mayors. They work to resolve problems venues have related to crime, noise complaints, and making sure that venues keep everything up to code.
It's culture, right? People will travel for this, so it'll draw more tourists.
Dmitry Petrov is a communications manager at Lifestyle, a company that helps match artists and talent with venues. He says a lot of the resistance is noise complaints from neighbors, especially in areas that were not accustomed to the nighttime scene. Some of the warehouse venues Petrov uses are in quieter neighborhoods like Sunset Park in Brooklyn. He understands the neighbors' wariness.
All of a sudden, these are sleepy communities these warehouses are in, and then, thousands of partygoers show up and, start, being rowdy in the streets. So it's understandable why people don't want it. So that's the biggest challenge, I would say.
Brendan is grateful to New York's late-night scene for providing a space for him and less well-known artists to test things out. He used to DJ with Lady Gaga on Rivington Street in the Lower East Side more than a decade ago. He knows what it means to have a space to do your own thing.
That's where we really felt like we had a place that was our own. We could be misfits. We could do something that wasn't mainstream, and we could still find ways to practice and get better at what we were doing.
Sullivan doesn't know how many other people are up for the director of nightlife position, and he won't know until later this month when the city makes the announcement. They're also expected to appoint a 12-person nightlife advisory board later this month. Patricia Jacob, Columbia Radio News.
As New York City tries to curb sex shops, adult entertainment giant Pornhub opened up a pop-up store in the upscale neighborhood of Soho. Local sex shops with a long history in New York City talk about their work, what it's about, and some of the challenges they face today. Lorena Rios reports.
New York City is no longer the city of peep shows, porn theaters, and adult video shops of the late 80s. The city has passed legislation that makes it hard for adult establishments to exist. James Bure, owner of AJ Lingerie on West 28th Street, has been operating a sex shop along his 80-year-old mother since 2001.
I mean, let's be serious. There's some of these drugstore chains have started to open up an aisle of toys. And even Walmart was thinking of starting to carry adult novelties. So, I mean, yeah, it is 2018 in another 3 weeks.
At least 5 sex shops in Greenwich Village have shut down in the past 7 years.
One of the biggest problems in Manhattan is the high rent. That is what's going to do most of the small businesses in New York City and put them out of business. Either you have to be very, very high end or you have to be very big, otherwise you're not going to succeed.
Hello, how are you, sweetie?
When you say party supplies, that's upstairs?
No, I have my party supplies would be for bachelorette parties.
Not for kids' parties.
No. Kids' party.
Zoning laws designed to clean up neighborhoods prohibit adult establishments from being 500 feet of schools and religious establishments. But Pornhub, the online adult entertainment site with 64 million daily visitors, is challenging the city's efforts to curb sex shops. On Black Friday, it set up a pop-up store in Soho, offering mostly branded clothing like hats, underwear, hoodies, socks, and the occasional handcuff.
I don't think that Pornhub is going to affect my business in any way. It was very intelligent marketing on their part. They're selling their name, which everybody immediately knows. It's like Pornhub is known with most mature adults. I mean, I've heard of it, have seen it, and most people, I would think, have looked at it out of curiosity once before.
Boutique sex shops still dot high-end neighborhoods in Manhattan. Ryan DiMartino is a manager at the Pleasure Chest, a sex shop on the Upper East Side that has been open since the 70s. She says Pornhub pop-up store is not really a competitor, but a starting point for the Pleasure Chest to promote a sex-positive culture and sex education.
Sometimes you're a little bit of a therapist, sometimes you're a little bit of a coach or a cheerleader, sometimes you are a troubleshooter, sometimes I feel like we're like tech support when people can't figure out what's going on with their body or with this object that they're trying to use in a particular way and they're not reaching their end goal. It's different every day.
Sex shops today are very different from the old, seedy, adult novelty businesses. DiMartino sees the open and welcoming facade of today's sex shops as an opportunity to talk about sex and the power dynamics that shape gender roles and women's status in society.
Well, first of all, whether we're ready or not to have conversations about sex or nuanced conversations about sex and power, we have to. We're not going to get ready, and we're not going to get any better by avoiding it or waiting for readiness, because it doesn't just come unless you work towards it.
America makes up about 40% of Pornhub's viewership, and many are making their ways into sex shops. Long gone are the days in which tinted windows and giant XXX signs kept people away from exploring their sexuality. Lorena Rios, Columbia Radio News.
Silicon Valley may be growing, but its diversity isn't. A new study from the Government Accountability Office shows only 33% of tech employees are people of color. But one Brooklyn High School robotics program has encouraged more students of color to join the world of gears and gadgets. Jennifer Wynn reports.
Most high schoolers' Saturday hangout spot is the mall or movie theater. But Edward R. Murrow High School's robotics team prefers to spend its time in a science lab. Class isn't actually in session. The students traded in their pencils for power tools. They're handling drills, hammers, and saws. They're part of Shark Bites, the school's robotics team, participating in a scrimmage for an upcoming competition called First Tech Challenge. Murrow High is known as an art school. It's also the most racially diverse public school in the city, and the team reflects that. The students want to prove they can do more than just theater. They want to break into tech.
We might be underfunded, but we actually do have the skill to build a robot that will be used in regionals.
That's Kenneth Pacheco, a senior who joined the team after a concussion left him out of the wrestling team 2 years ago. A lack of STEM funding is one of the reasons why students of color, especially in under-resourced neighborhoods, don't consider pursuing the sciences. SharkBite's team leader Ebony Rivas is happy that Murrow High is now getting STEM grants.
If you go into a place and, there's a bunch of people that are not like you and, they're not really talking to you, you wouldn't want to stay there.
Rivas is African American, but she's also a girl, and girls haven't had it easy in STEM. She didn't get into science until 2 years ago because she wasn't sure if it was for her, just like some other girls at school.
They look in there and they're a little intimidated. They're like, oh man, there's some boys in here.
But before long, she found her groove. Gabrielle Martinez is also pretty new to science, and she wants to be an example for aspiring Latina scientists.
In history, girls were always held back in the science department and in a lot of other departments because guys were always given the upper hand, they're better, they're smarter. But
robotics advisor Daniela Delacroix-Noel has noticed the kids improving in their science classes ever since the Shark Bites were created 3 years ago.
They've taken AP classes, they've learned coding. It really is a situation where they want to do something and they don't know how to do it, so they learn.
That led Assistant Principal Carlos Reyes to expand the science department with more classes to keep up with demand.
The interest in terms of engineering, we now have 3 classes. We started with 1. We're also going to start a second class of coding. So the interest is there, okay? And we're hoping to build this up.
And Pacheco hopes to one day get a job in STEM.
We're in a new age of technology, and there's not that many engineers around, so it's a new age for people to learn.
Murrow High hopes the recent STEM expansion will lead to more graduates pursuing STEM in college and beyond. But for the Shark Bites, its goal this year is simple: make it to regionals. Jennifer Wynn, Columbia Radio News.
Black and Latino high school students in the South Bronx are getting a crash course in political activism. The students of South Bronx Community Charter High School organized their own street protest against police brutality in partnership with Black Lives Matter. The march was held on Saturday, December 2nd. David Jha has more.
In a brightly lit room that resembles a small dance studio, a group of about 15 ninth graders gather in a circle. They're here to learn how to be marshals in the upcoming Black Lives Matter protest. Miriam Diakite is 14 years old. She's here to fight against police violence.
I signed up to be a marshal to find justice for every police victim, for every black person that died in the hands of a police, and like there was no justice in their case. So that's the whole point of the march.
The curriculum at South Bronx Community is highly student-driven, and getting trained for protests came out of student interest. Alexis Danzig and Jamie Bauer are members of the activism group Rise and Resist.
So we're here to train the young people how to comport themselves in the street as marshals.
We're a direct action group, so we do a lot of street demonstrations. We usually have a small group of the organizers who are wearing colored armbands, and they're marshaling, but think of it more like facilitating the demonstration. We help make it a little less chaotic and a little
welcoming.
Safer, more welcoming.
The students partner up and practice calmly responding to hecklers by engaging them in conversation.
Can we get 2 lines here, please? I want to see everybody buddied up. You want to practice looking people right in the eye and asking them, what is your name? Why do you have that opinion?
The class discusses how to react when police are present. Danzig warns students to never touch a police officer.
Touching a police officer is an assault, so you never want to touch a cop.
But can we get arrested?
Yes. No.
This is the second year that South Bronx community students have worked with Black Lives Matter to organize a march. Hawk Newsom, president and founder of Black Lives Matter of Greater New York, says activism gives students a unique opportunity to learn skills they won't find in a classroom. The protest is completely student-run, with Hawk serving in a supporting role.
They wrote the press release. They crafted letters to elected officials. It's their words. They're learning communication skills. They're learning how politics works. They're learning how to get your message out, your points across. At 14, could you imagine what they'll be like at 24?
Mario Benabe is a science teacher at South Bronx Community. He hopes the martial training will inspire students to continue their activism in the future.
Whenever any of our students experience any form of injustice, they can use these skills to combat whatever injustice they feel on a deeply personal level. The ultimate vision is to be able to see more youths engage in this type of work.
The importance of fighting peacefully against injustice is not lost on 14-year-old Miriam Diakite.
It's not like we're gonna go and punch people or rush through people. We're doing this non-violently. Every day, somebody's dying. Some black person is dying over something as irrelevant as candy and soda.
As the struggle for racial justice continues, expect to see South Bronx community students leading the fight in the future. David Jha, Columbia Radio News. Starting a food business is risky. At the outset, costs are high and there's no guarantee that a new venture will turn a profit in its first years. One space in the Bronx is trying to change the odds of success. It's called Bronx Cook Space, and it's been helping young food entrepreneurs get established through an incubator program. This year is its 25th anniversary. McCunna Air has the story.
Inside a building, in a quiet South Bronx neighborhood, Ramon Acevedo is making empanadas. For $25 an hour, he rents a unit of this industrial kitchen. This space has been vital to Acevedo. He started working here in 2004, and at one point, he was making 50,000 empanadas a day. But during the recession, business plummeted. The Bronx Cook Space, he says, gave him the flexibility, skills, and encouragement to rebuild.
They gave us all the confidence for us to stay and to try to revive the business. Because at that time, practically, I was in bankruptcy. I never declared that, but it ate all my savings.
He's still going, but these days, he makes only a third of the amount of empanadas he used to. Alex Fellman is the program manager of the space.
Incubator kitchens are important because it allows food businesses to get started with very low overhead. Instead of opening your own space and paying rent and buying equipment, you can come in here, rent by the hour, and get started on a very small scale.
Fellman helps people like Acevedo grow their businesses. As well as offering cooking facilities, the Bronx Cook Space helps tenants navigate city regulations and improve their marketing. She shows me around the
Let's
kitchen.
open the door. So this is one of our walk-in refrigerated units.
People come to the kitchen from all different backgrounds. Some are low income, trying to get back on their feet after a job loss. Others are professionals.
We have people who have never worked in a commercial kitchen before, who, they make a pie and everybody says their pie, oh, this is so good, you should sell this. And they finally decide, okay, yeah, I'm going to try it.
That was Acevedo's story. He began making empanadas in his apartment about 15 years ago, then decided it was worth trying to expand. He's grateful he found this place.
Well, it has been my bread and butter.
He says, without it,
I think I would not exist in New York. I should have moved to somewhere else.
He's trucking along, but for others, this space has been a launching pad for success. The best-known company to come out of this space is The Farmer's Dog, an organic, all-natural dog food company. It uses ingredients like kale, quinoa, and steak in its dog food.
They make dog food, which is completely legal in this kitchen. It's totally fine. They make human-grade dog food. Their catchphrase is, if your dog doesn't like our food, send it back and we'll eat it.
Today, The Farmer's Dog is based in Chicago and distributes nationwide. Fellman would love all the businesses here to be that successful.
Because this is an incubator. Eventually, we want everybody in here to leave. We want them to grow. We want them to move on to a bigger, better space.
Acevedo and his team get back to their tasks. Behind him, the corn grinder hums, the music plays, and thousands of yellow dumplings are pinched shut, put in cases, and frozen in the industrial freezers. Soon, they'll make their way to restaurants throughout New York City. McConaughey Air, Columbia Radio News.
Well, that does it for today's broadcast of Uptown Radio. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Our executive producer today was Amara Mokwe. Our senior producer, Sarah Wyman, worked with McConaughey Air and Jennifer Siegel.
Senior editor Madeleine Thompson and assistant editor Heather Schering led our copy team.
Director Kelsey Blazer coordinated our studio production with Colin Marston and Patricia Jacob. Jennifer Wynn worked on our website. Radio professors Carrie Donahue, Sally Herships, and Ashley Milne-Tite advised our staff. I'm David Jha.
And I'm Prikuti Rai. You can always find us on uptown.org. From all of us here at Uptown Radio, thanks for listening.